quickly because it's from, I learned it years ago. I hope it's Deuteronomy. Of course, will immediately know, oh yes, that's it. Or you might. Yeah, I was right. Deuteronomy 6:5. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And really, I was hoping that it would include the rest of it, which maybe you can guide me to, and your neighbor as yourself. But I don't know if that only comes when Jesus makes the reference. So I don't know if anyone is able to produce that. But it must be in regard to the law, you know, that he says the whole law is found in that. You shall love the Lord your God with all your soul, with all your strength, and your neighbor as yourself. I don't know if it's when the guy comes up and says, who is my neighbor, you know, it might be.
It was the one where maybe you just said, which is the greatest commandment.
I see, yes. Good, good.
The lawyer or the scribe or whoever.
Good. So that must be John somewhere, it seems to me, and John would be the one who would. Yes, of course, we're all, or not all of us, because I see Colleen has her own, but we're all stuck with the RSV that has not a concordance in it. But
I have it in mine upstairs. I know.
Yes,
it says the sayings of Jesus.
Isn't it? Oh, really? So it must be John.
Sermon on the Mount, but you think it's John.
No, you might be right. I just thought the love would be John, but no. Sermon on the Mount is Matthew. Is it 25? Is that right? Or
Pastor, you're
Matthew
right.
5.
It does go into the Good Samaritan because the guy says, "And who is my neighbor?"
Well, I thought that. Yes.
Isn't it Matthew 22 and 37? You shall love your neighbors yourself. You shall love the Lord your God.
Of course, you were the girl who won the quizzes. She always won the quizzes.
Is this not it? Yes.
Oh, yes, but you toss it off so casually while I'm wandering out in the desert here, desolate and bereft. Matthew 22, and which verse?
And 37, and the second is like it, 37
Yes.
through 39.
Marty, that happens to me all the time. I'll be struggling with some hidden problem. And she'll say, oh, and I always feel it's like those smart little girls in the back of the class that always knew the answer. So it's Matthew, thank you, love, Matthew 22 and 37. And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. And of course, I think both Irene and I were bewildered. I probably heard it first, but we were both bewildered when, I don't know if Marty and Colleen are aware, but certainly back in the midst of the little time of revival in Minneapolis, right back in the midst of all the enthusiasm of the Jesus people and of the whole movement of God's Spirit, you know, among the college-age people at that time, there was this interpretation that many of them took for granted. And we thought, it's crazy, I've never heard it before. It's turning it's turning God's word upside down. And they would say, yes, you love your neighbor as yourself. You must first, of course, love yourself. Then you will know how to love your neighbor. And of course, it baffled me, you know. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, because they would reply, yes, there it is, you see. You should love your neighbor as yourself. You should love him the way you love yourself. You should love him. But of course, it's very important to love yourself. And of course, as you can guess, the me generation were very strong in emphasizing that. First, you must love yourself. And then you'll know how to love your neighbor. Well, of course, coming up as we did from our generation, we were very clear, you know, we lived in the through the Second World War, and therefore very conscious of things like Churchill's famous statement, you know, never have so many owed so much to so few. And he was talking about the Spitfire pilots, the RAF pilots that managed to win the Battle of Britain against overwhelming numbers of German Luftwaffe that were softening Britain up for Hitler to invade. And so we came up in that whole atmosphere, you know, that we owed a lot to these few brave pilots who really, they'd go out 20 of them and 5 would come back, you know, in a day. So we were very conscious that that was loving your neighbor. You loved your neighbor, even if it cost you your life. And so we were very clear, love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus is saying, forget yourself, love your neighbor. You love your neighbor the way you used to love yourself. And so, of course, that was very clear to us. And we were baffled when this other interpretation came in. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, and they would say that. I mean, I've talked to young men and women who have said, yes, it doesn't say plainly, love your neighbor as yourself. You know, first you love yourself and make sure you do that. And then love your neighbor the same way. And of course, being human beings, we somehow don't get around to the second part. I mean, we're so busy practicing the first part, you know, we want to get the loving yourself proper right first. And of course, it led then to the whole emphasis of the me generation, you know, that you must love yourself, you must take care of yourself, you must look after yourself, and all those things are right. You need to take care of the body that God has given you. But of course, it was turned into self-centeredness, and it became really the war cry of the me generation, you know. First comes yourself, and then other people after that. So for us, it was doublespeak, you know. For us, it was 1984. It was George Orwell, all that he said, you know, that good will become evil and evil will become good. And unfortunately, you probably would have to say that that still is the general attitude that people have. Whether they actually turn the commandment upside down in interpretation or not, I don't know, but certainly it's the attitude today. First, you must take care of yourself, and you must look after yourself, and then you must do what you can. Of course, we joke with each other at times because it often is used by philanthropists, and especially by Christian philanthropists, you know, because here you can give to the orphans and you can help others while you're helping yourself. And you can do it because you get a tax break. And so there's some emphasis on help others while you're helping yourself. And of course, we joke each other about it because we think, no, that's, the emphasis is still on helping yourself. And let me help others as long as I don't have to stop helping myself. And of course we feel, no, it's the opposite, you know. And of course, where would we get it? Well, actually, I think we'd get it from the verse that we're studying today. It's Ephesians 5 and 28. And at first it appears to have some of that ambiguity. You'll see it there yourself, Ephesians 5 and 28. Even so, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. And of course, it all becomes very clear when you see the whole context in which Paul applies it. And it explains too why he seems to introduce a little detour. Because you see up in verse 21, he's talking about marriage. Be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, be subject to your husbands as to the Lord. And then suddenly he makes a detour. He gets into ecclesiology. A study of the church, theology of the church. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Saviour. As the church is subject to Christ, so let wives also be subject in everything to their husbands. And it's interesting, you know, why does Paul suddenly turn around from the marriage question to the relationship of Jesus to the church? And of course, then you begin to see his whole picture of marriage is in his mind an expression of the great mystery of the relationship of Christ to the church. And it's the relationship that Christ has to the church that actually defines the attitude of the husband to the wife. He's saying that's the kind of relationship it is. It's that kind of love that the marriage must experience. It's the same love as Christ had for the church. And of course, immediately then, you begin to see how Christ's attitude to the church defines what loving another person is. Because there's just no way. There's no way in which you can say, oh yes, Christ first loved himself. And whenever loving the church began to touch him, he backed off. The first point of a sword that touched his flesh, he backed off right away. Because he loved himself. And then after that, he loved others. And you realize it's such a lie that it breaks your heart. In no way did he love himself. In no way did he protect himself. In no way did he say, no, I love you, but wait a minute, I'm about to lose my life. So there, my love for others ceases. And it becomes clear to us all, you know, that Jesus' attitude to the church and to us is what real love is. It's loving others, loving God first, and then loving others, and then somewhere down the line it's yourself. But generally it's ignore yourself. Generally it's die to yourself. Generally it's deny yourself. Generally it's God first, others next, and yourself last. And of course it helps them to apply that to what he says in 28, even so husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. Love your wife as yourself, in place of yourself. Love your wife in place of yourself. And then he says that that's the paradox of it. He who loves his wife does love himself, because you put your wife in place of yourself, as Jesus put his own life last and put the church first. And of course it brings up the whole issue that we have come upon several times, Now, where does that leave the rest of us? If Colleen is married to somebody, where does that put me in her love? Or if Irini is married to me, where does that put Marty in her love? And it seems to me the whole world has led us into a misconception of love in this regard, because the world, of course, knows little of real love. And so the only way it can define love is in a kind of exclusivity, where, this person is married to this person, so they obviously love this person more than they love anybody else. And of course it makes foolishness of the whole idea of love and the whole idea of marriage itself. Because of course there is no possibility of a degree of love like that. Your father loves you more than he loves your sister, or he loves you more than he loves your mother, or he loves you more than he loves his brother, or he loves you more than somebody else to whom he is very close to for years. No, love has not degrees like that. It has different relationships and expresses itself in different ways in those relationships. But it doesn't in any way mean that this person loves his wife more than he loves his friend, or this person loves his father more than he loves his brother. No, the love does not have degrees. There are different relationships. There are things that we have, that a husband and wife have passed through together, that they have not passed through with other people. And those will always be there, and those are always experiences that they look back upon, and they're experiences that colour their attitude and the relationship to each other. But similarly, you and I, who have lived through the auction of the stuff in Garden Court, have lived through an experience that actually even Irini and I haven't lived through. And so all of us have different relationships and different ways in which we're close to each other or understand each other, but it's not a degree of love. The degree of love is always the same in all cases. God first, others next, and yourself last. And it seems to me that's what the Father has called us to. I do think that's a little of, you may say, oh, you're rather elevating my experience last week, but I do think it's a little of what came through to the customer that you visited. I'm talking about Colleen. I probably will be able to tell it more or less correctly, but she went into this store, and of course the people had forgotten that she was coming. And they said, oh, we forgot about the appointment. So of course she was set for it and all that kind of thing. And I think had either brought her stuff in or was going to bring her stuff in. And dear, I mean, it was God's grace to you, and I just, what they say, take my hat off to you. Colleen replied, oh, and of course, obviously, probably was disappointed deep down, but that wasn't what came out. She said, oh, that's all right, that's okay, I'll, well, you know, I don't take long, you know, and they were hesitant, and then they said, oh, all right. She said, maybe I'll just take 10 minutes or whatever. And they said, oh, all right. And so she brought in her stuff, and she went through the thing with a light, as far as I can catch it from you, if I'm reading you right. And you didn't play up this, but as far as I could guess from listening to you, with a light heart, you know, with a light, joyful heart. She did the presentation, and they did seem to take a little fire even as she did the presentation, you know, and then came to the end, and she started to gather up her stuff, and she went out with the first lot, you know, and came back in and realized they had been talking about her, you know. And then I don't know if she said something to them, but they were just delighted. They said, it's beautiful. This stuff is beautiful. And then, of course, they said, and, you know, we're just so glad that you're our rep. You're just a great rep. And so the whole thing was kind of turned around into a kind of an upbeat, enjoyable interaction. And I really do think it was because you put yourself last and you put away out of your mind any thought of, I'm losing my commission here, or I'm not getting this sale, you know. But just was delighted to do it. Throw self away. Forget whether this is, in my mind as a human being, a good experience or a bad experience. Let me enjoy this, and let me do what Jesus wants me to do. And it seems to me that's the difference, you know. It seems to me it's loving your neighbor as yourself, loving your neighbor, doing unto others what they would have them do unto you, treating them as you treat yourself. And for me, that's always been the heart of what God was after in Christian Core. Well, how does Peg feel when it's not too good in the physical side? And how is she feeling now? And does she, of course I joke her about popcorn, how can you eat popcorn? But will she like that? Will she like that, or will this do her harm or make her feel sick? What is she going to do this afternoon? What's she going to do this evening? It seems to me that's what love is. It's about treating each other the way you used to treat yourself, you know. If you press me and say, like having no self, well, that's what I'd say. That's what I'd say. Please, I'm not saying I always do that, but that's what I say it is. It's forgetting that you exist. It's accepting that God took the old you that used to be respected and looked after here on earth, and he destroyed that in Christ, and that's finished with, and now you're a new being, an angel somewhere in the middle between heaven and earth. And you're mainly a carrier of Christ. And it's him, it's his life. And it seems to me then there's a love of his that comes and fills your heart and goes out to others. So that you are really like the De Hooses, you know, everything for guess. You live for God and for other people. You don't live for yourself at all. And if you say to me, well, what will happen to yourself? Well, if God doesn't look after you, you're lost. But that's his business. His business is to look after you, and your business is to look after him and others. And it seems to me that's the heart of this business here, you know. And wherever we do that, we actually end up loving ourselves without intending to, because you're looking after other people in a self-forgetful way, and the Father is looking after you. So it is something worth coming into. Let us pray.